How's it going, Tiny Whoopers? Today we're going to be going through the different steps that I took to install Project Mockingbird onto my F3 Evo BetaFPV flight controller. Now, because all the drones I fly are FrSky, I'm going to go through the different steps I took to also put the settings on my Taranis X90 Plus. I already have my micro USB cable and my Taranis sitting over here, so I'm ready to go. Let's jump over to the computer and start working. Alright, so here we are. This is Qreacher's YouTube page and latest video showing off some Mockingbird flying, and you should definitely go and subscribe to his channel. I'm sure any updates or anything like that regarding the project will come from him first, so that's going to be the best bet regarding that. If you look in the description of his video, and I think it's in the last few videos that he's done, there is a link to the Google Doc. And the Google Doc itself, which I have open right here, is actually going to go through all the different things that I am. So for BetaFPV flight controllers, if you go to the BetaFPV website and do a little searching, you'll find this document here that essentially shows the different steps required to flash the upgraded firmware to your flight controller. BetaFPV has two different types of boards at the moment. One is the F3 Evo and the other is just a standard F3. The Tiny Whoop we're using in today's demonstration has the F3 Evo. I'm going to look for the SP Racing Evo or F3 Evo, and I'm going to switch now over to Betaflight. Let's hook up the Tiny Whoop. Alright, once you get your Tiny Whoop hooked up to the computer, we're going to switch to the Firmware Flasher tab, and then you want to make sure that you choose SP Racing F3 Evo, or if you have the other Betaflight board, then you would just choose, where is it? I think it's just Betaflight F3. Either way, the same version is available on each one. So what I did was I flashed version 3.2.4. So we're going to choose that. I left full chip erase on, but I don't believe you need to. And then I always load the firmware online. What you're going to notice is when I go ahead and try to flash the firmware here, you can see it failed. And basically with all flight controllers, there's a certain way that you put it into boot mode. I know with BetaFPV boards, you essentially bridge two ports or two, I don't even know what they're called, but I guess I would call them two ports on the flight controller. But I actually don't like to do any of that, and there's an easier way. And the way I do it is when I want to put it into like flashing mode, I think it's called DFU mode, I get this tool called ImpulseRC driver fixer, and if I run that tool, let's actually, oh wait, we're not even connected. Yeah, if I run this tool with the Tiny Whoop hooked up, it's gonna look for the flight controller and then install the necessary driver to switch it into the DFU mode. So once you get this success drivers fixed, you might get this little Chrome warning. I just ignore that. Betaflight doesn't even run through Chrome anymore, so I don't think that really applies. But then if you go back down here, you can then click the flash firmware and get another error. Let's load the firmware online, make sure everything is correct. SP Racing. Oh, I have F4 Evo, of course. So don't be an idiot like me and choose the wrong thing. Let's switch it to the SP Racing F3 Evo. Load the firmware, and now we should be able to flash it. So now that we've flashed 3.2.4, I'm going to open up the log in Betaflight, and we're going to connect. And you can see right here the flight controller is being identified as Betaflight 3.2.4. And the board is showing the SP Evo, so everything is right. So in my setup, since I'm using the Tyrannus, I go to the ports tab here, and typically I need to turn on Serial RX on UART2. Once you do that, just hit save and reboot. You might get an error, but most likely it worked anyway. I'm not sure why it shows errors like that, but I get them a lot and just kind of ignore them. When I connect back to the board, go to the ports tab, you can see UART2 is selected with the Serial RX toggle. So the next thing you're going to want to do is go to the configuration tab. You want to make sure brushed motors are selected. Sometimes when I flash the board, it will not have this motor PWM speed separated from PID speed. And I'm not sure why that is or if it's really needed, but I turned it on and then I set the frequency to 16,000. I don't like it when my motors spin just by arming, so I usually turn motor stop on. Then scrolling further down over here under system configuration, I leave this one at 8, but I switch the PID loop to 4 kilohertz. And I also disable this barometer. I don't think we really have that. I also like to give my craft a name. That way, if you have OSD, it'll show your sweet pilot name. At this point, I would go ahead and hit save and reboot. When I go back and make sure all my settings were saved, it should all be there. I have the 8 and the 4, the barometer's turned off. And now another issue that I've faced when setting these boards up, if you forget in the ports tab to turn on the Serial RX for UART2, I needed that turned on in order to set the receiver to be S-Bus. Once I set the receiver, I like to just go ahead and save and reboot before I do anything else. And then I'll connect again and just make sure that those settings stuck. And they did. And then the next setting, and probably the last one on the configuration tab, is to turn on this dynamic filter. So I'm going to save and reboot it again. I'm going to run through, just make sure everything is the way I want it. Dynamic filters on, so we're ready to move on. Alright, so once we have the configuration all set up and you verify that all your values are there, the next thing you're going to want to do is go to the PID tuning. For the PID tuning, I follow exactly what Patrick says in his document. These are the PIDs right here. We're going to plug those in to Betaflight. Let's see, we got 90, 110, 45, 100, 130, 45, whoops, 190, 120, and let's save this. let's go to the rate setup now. And for angle mode, this is the suggested setup. So let's plug these in. RC rate 2.21. Super 0. RC Expo 0. The yaw RC rate is 2.07. Clear out all your super rates. Once you've done that, let's set these other settings. Angle strength, we'll set to 80. Horizon 30. I don't even fly horizon, so I don't really care, but set this up anyway. And the angle limit is 55 to match FPV to that, but 60, yeah. So we're going to go to a 60 angle limit. And then just to verify that the other settings we have in here are right, set that to 1 and 1. And this should be 0.1. Save that. Then from there, we want to switch to this filter tab. We're going to want to switch the filtering from PT1 and then disable all 3 of the notch filters. We'll save that. Just make sure everything's in there the way we had it. So the next step will probably be to bind the flight controller to your transmitter. You can verify that that's done. Let me turn mine on really quick. By going to the receiver tab here, making sure you're bound to the flight controller. I'm just moving around the sticks here to make sure the different things that need to happen do. And they're working correctly. Y'all's right. Alright, so we're good to go there. And then from here you can just switch to your modes tab. And I already have these modes set up, but I'll quickly explain why I set mine up this way. For my quads, I have a single switch for arming, and that's on aux 2. And with my transmitter powered on and bound to the flight controller, flipping the switch will move this little indicator down here. So what this is basically saying is arm the quad when I have it flipped to the up position, and otherwise do not arm it. The next mode is angle mode. I have that on aux 1, which is my SA switch on the X90 Plus. I have that set up to a region where only the neutral position is activated, and this makes it so that as soon as you arm the quad, without flipping any other switches, you will be starting in angle mode. And if you want acro, you would put the switch in the middle position, which you can see turns off the angle mode there. And the only other mode that I set up is air mode. I put that at the very end of the same switch, aux 1, as angle mode. And basically what that does is when I flip the switch all the way down, we'll be in acro with air mode enabled. That is the mode setup that I use, but the mode setup in the document Patrick has is also really good, and he goes through setting it up to switch the different rate profiles and a few other settings, I believe, that are shown here in the PID Tuning tab. After you've got your modes set up, the quad should be good to go. The final steps for setting up the Mockingbird is to add the settings to your controller, and these are mixing settings that essentially, when you add in a little bit of roll, pitch, or yaw, gives you a slight boost in throttle. I use slightly different rates than the ones shown here for my quads, but they're very, very similar. So I will screen grab those after this video, and I will hopefully post a link to them in the description. But now that we're done with the computer here, you can disconnect from your Tiny Whoop, disconnect the micro USB cable, and we're ready to do the transmitter setup. You're going to want to power on your transmitter. This step is really easy, but for whatever profile or model you have set up here, you want to get into your menu, and then we're going to go to the mixer page. And then once you're on the mixer page, typically channel 1 will be your throttle. You can verify by moving the throttle, and you will see this indicator changing to reflect it. From here, all you need to do really is hold the enter button down. When the menu pops up, you want to scroll down and choose insert after, and then press enter. On the next screen that comes up, our source is our throttle. You want to change the weight to 30. Then, after you've set the weight, you want to make sure these other settings are set the way that are described for your transmitter. If you're using the Tyrannus, then the next thing we need to change is the curve. The curve will be set to function. And the X in the 2 pipes. Lastly, you want to set it to a switch. In this case, and in regards to the Mockingbird setup, the switch that you will want to set up will be the switch that you use to switch between your different flight modes. And for my setup, that's going to be SA. I want SA to be in the neutral position, which is angle mode for me. So I flipped it to get it to register it, but I then flipped it back to the default positions so it shows SA with the arrow pointing up. Once that's set, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped something here. Let's go back up here. And the source is not the throttle. I think I might have said that, but you want to change the source from throttle to aileron. And then once we have everything else set up the way that is described, you can then exit out. And we want to go back to the throttle and add one more. So long press the enter button, go down, choose insert after. And instead of the aileron, we're going to choose to ELE and change the weight to 30. Set the curve to be the same. And set the switch to the same position. And that's it. That is the mixer setup. Then you can go back to your mixer after you've exited out. And with channel 1 highlighted, if you move your roll or pitch, you should notice the change in throttle happening, and everything seems to work. I really hope this video might have helped you guys get started using the Mockingbird recipe. Patrick has done an outstanding job putting this document together, so you should definitely be using that whenever you're installing this for the first time, and you definitely should try out all of his settings exactly as they are before making any other adjustments or tuning things to your liking. Even the adjustments I made, other than I would say the modes, I would follow exactly what Patrick has in the document, see if you like that, and then move on from there if you want to make any adjustments. This thing really flies amazing. I'm definitely keeping it on all my whoops, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. So happy flying, everybody. Whoop on.